Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Monday, July 8th, 2024. House Speaker Mike Johnson criticizes what he says has been a dangerous weakness under Democratic leadership when it comes to foreign policy, and promotes a new policy of peace through strength from Republicans. President Joe Biden is hosting NATO military alliance leaders this week for a summit in Washington, and today the Biden administration is asked about whether those leaders are concerned about the president's physical and mental health, part of the continuing fallout from his debate performance against Republican challenger Donald Trump a week and a half ago. President Biden calls into an MSNBC morning show to say once again he's not dropping out of the presidential race and that he's frustrated with what he calls the elites of his party that are calling on him to do so. And the White House has asked about reports an expert on Parkinson's disease from Walter Reed National Military Medical Center visited the White House multiple times over the last year. French election results yield a long road ahead to form a coalition government after an alliance of left and moderate parties kept the right out of power. We'll talk about it with Washington Post international correspondent Rick Nowak in Paris. Story from the Washington Post. House Speaker Mike Johnson on Monday laid out his vision for conservative American foreign policy, addressing the interconnected web of threats posed by China, Russia, Iran, and others, a group of nations openly aligned against the United States. The discussion, hosted by the Hudson Institute, a Washington think tank, marked the first time Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, has publicly commented at length on his foreign policy views. Monday's event comes as European and other foreign leaders descend on Washington this week for the annual summit of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, whose member nations will be focused on efforts to safeguard the alliance from an increasingly aggressive Russia and further help Ukraine repel Russia's invasion. Russian missiles on Monday struck a children's hospital in the Ukrainian capital, killing dozens. That was the story from the Washington Post. The title of Speaker Johnson's speech today was Threats to the U.S.-Led World Order.
During the Obama administration, we saw 8 years of international apology tours. We saw the sequestration of our military, the buildup of ISIS, Russia's invasion into Crimea, the spread of malign Chinese influence around the globe, and a nuclear deal that gave Iran everything they wanted. And what are we facing today? The same failures we saw under Obama have happened under Joe Biden because he's empowered an out-of-touch foreign policy establishment who has an agenda very different than the one that we need right now. Their agenda is about, once again, appeasing and apologizing and accommodating. Joe Biden doesn't treat China like an enemy. He's stopped supporting Israel and has cozied up to Iran to revive the failed nuclear deal. And in the most inexplicable policy imaginable, he's opened our borders wide to spies and terrorists while reducing sanctions on Latin dictators who wreak havoc in our backyard. And the results of this were completely foreseeable, and we're all living through it. Obama's weakness invited aggression, and Biden's weakness has fueled that aggression like nothing we've seen since World War II. Things were different when I came to Congress during the first administration of Donald Trump, 2017. We came to Washington at the same time, and I was elected chairman of the Republican Study Committee about a year and a half later in 2019. That was the largest caucus in Congress. And one of the first things I did as chairman of RSC was to create a national security task force. We published a report with 130 policy recommendations to do some very important things, to counter China, to deter Russia, and to advance American interest in the Middle East. And to the chagrin of the pundits who want to paint him as an isolationist, if you look at the objective facts in the history, you know President Trump established a solid security posture that advanced the same principles that we outlined in our report. Remember how he threatened North Korea with, quote, fire and fury, the likes of which the world has never seen? I would do it in my Trump impression, but I won't do that for you this morning. It's better when he said it. Remember how he took out Soleimani and al-Baghdadi. Remember how he was the first president to send Javelin missiles to Ukraine and how he took steps to rebuild our military. Remember how simple Trump's approach to arms control was? He ended one-sided treaties, he called out Russia for violating the INF Treaty, and he ensured America was developing the weaponry to win if challenged. He called out the threat to China, and he took on their unfair trade practices. He got our allies to pay their fair share. He enforced oil sanctions on Iran, and he brokered the Abraham Accords. And the foreign policy establishment absolutely hated it. But he did not retreat, and he did not apologize. He instilled fear in our enemies, and with his leadership made clear that American strength is essential to a peaceful 21st century. Now, to be sure, the Republican Party is not one of nation builders or careless interventionists. We don't believe we should be the world's policemen, nor are we idealists who think we can placate tyrants. We are realists. We don't seek out a fight, but we know we have to be prepared. We have to be prepared to fight, and if we must fight, we fight with the gloves off. And today, when our adversaries don't need to cross oceans to harm our people, we need a new policy of peace through strength for the 21st century.
House Speaker Mike Johnson at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. He also said during this speech that Republicans will try to increase defense spending.
To meet our defense needs, Congress has to work to grow our economy and significantly reduce our overall spending. And I can promise you that come 2025, spending reform will be a top priority for our new Republican majority. And they're not going to be easy conversations, but they are essential for our long-term survival. Congress has to prioritize the truly essential needs of our nation, and our national security has to be at the top of that list.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, at the Hudson Institute. You can find his full speech and the question and answer period after at our video library, cspan.org. The speaker is scheduled to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during the NATO Summit sidelines in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, according to his schedule. Story from the Washington Times. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban predicted that former President Donald Trump would win the November election and said the change in leadership would be good for the world. Mr. Orban praised Mr. Trump during his Sunday interview with Axel Springer media outlets, including Politico, and called him a self-made man who takes a different approach to everything. He said he is the man of peace under his 4-year term. He did not initiate a single war, and he did a lot in order to create peace in old conflicts in very complicated areas of the world. That was from the Washington Times. At the White House today, John Kirby, National Security Communications Advisor, briefed reporters, talking about the NATO Summit in Washington this week and the focus on Russia's war against Ukraine, and taking reporters' questions about President Joe Biden's expected interaction with the leaders of the NATO countries.
Well, it's been heartening to see Ukraine hold on in this critical period. We should not forget the grim reality. Russia continues to bombard frontline towns with massive and low-accuracy glide bombs and sending missiles at Ukrainian cities, including over just the past weekend, where they hit a hospital, a children's hospital. Russia has ramped up its campaign against Ukrainian electrical generation, depriving the civilian population of power and attempting to set the conditions to punish them over the fall and the winter. To strengthen Ukraine's air defenses and to help Ukraine protect its cities and its grid, the United States and several of our allies will have several big announcements at this week's summit. And the NATO alliance will announce significant new steps to strengthen its military and political partnership with Ukraine to help Ukraine continue to defend themselves today and to deter Russian aggression well into the future. These elements, taken together with bilateral support, are part of a bridge to Ukraine's NATO membership. Together, the Washington Summit will send a strong signal to Mr. Putin that if he thinks he can outlast the coalition of countries that are supporting Ukraine, he's dead wrong again. As President Biden has said himself, Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, for free people refuse to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness.
Thanks, Ben. Good.
Thanks, John. You mentioned the context of this summit this week. It's also the first time the president interacted with these world leaders since that disastrous debate against former President Trump 10 days or so ago, where the president struggled to confront the former president on all sorts of things. What is the president's, does the president feel how does he plan to reassure American allies in NATO that he's up for the job now when he couldn't confront Trump on stage then?
I think the question presupposes the notion that they need to be reassured of American leadership and President Biden's commitment, and I don't believe that's the case. We're not picking up any signs of that from our allies at all, quite the contrary. The conversations that we're having with them in advance, they're excited about this summit, they're excited about the possibilities and the things that we're going to be doing together specifically to help Ukraine.
So you've seen zero, there have been stories in multiple outlets on both sides of the Atlantic in the last several days with questions from European leaders about the president's capacity to lead the United States. Are you just denying that?
I'm not aware of any such conversations that have been had, certainly none with us and here at the White House and with our staff. We're looking forward to it. I want to go back to what I said at the beginning. In the last 3 years, rather than browbeaten and insulting and demeaning allies, This president has invested in allies and partnerships. And when he took office, what I said, only nine allies had reached the 2% level. Now 23. That's not by accident. That's because of leadership. That's because of constant stewardship of the alliance and other partnerships around the world. The president's record speaks for itself, and the allies and the non-NATO friends and partners that are coming as well, they know that. They wouldn't be coming. New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, to a NATO summit if they didn't believe in American leadership and how important it is, and if they didn't believe that President Biden takes that responsibility extremely seriously.
John Kirby, White House National Security Spokesperson at today's White House news conference. Story from NBC News. President Joe Biden heads into the NATO summit meeting he's hosting in Washington this week with two distinct challenges, neither of them easy. On the international stage, he wants to make a case for preserving global alliances in an era when many populist and nationalist leaders are looking inward, his advisors say. But the tougher task will be on the domestic front, where he'll need to plow through 3 days of meetings, speeches, and dinners, capped by a news conference Thursday, with the vigor and focus that were noticeably absent during his debate with Donald Trump. The summit should be a friendly forum for Biden, who is trying to stave off calls from fellow Democrats to drop out of the presidential race after his poor debate showing. It's happening on his home turf, so he won't have to grapple with the overseas travel and late hours that he says left him depleted ahead of the debate. That was an article from NBC News. The U.S. ambassador to NATO, Julianne Smith, was interviewed today by Foreign Policy magazine editor-in-chief Ravi Agrawal about the NATO summit, and he asked her what she will say to NATO country leaders who may ask about President Biden's reelection campaign.
You know President Biden very well, and obviously anyone following the news cycle knows that there are real concerns about whether he will continue to run in this race. And, you know, whatever the news cycle says, whatever we hear from commentators, it is clear that leaders in Europe are also quite concerned, A, because if someone else steps in, it's a lot of turmoil, but B, they're looking at the polls. A lot of leaders are going to ask you about that this week. What are you telling them?
Well, look, the Europeans and our friends in Canada are always interested in our election, no doubt about that. This is one that they're watching closely. They've been watching it for a long time because of the length of our election cycle. We've also seen a number of European allies watching elections in Europe very closely, most notably in France just over the weekend. But in terms of our allies at this point across the alliance raising questions about Joe Biden himself and his ability to carry on, I haven't encountered that. We'll see what the week brings, but I think you've heard me. I think you've certainly heard the president's perspective. I had the good fortune of briefing the president about 3 weeks ago on the NATO Summit. He ended up peppering me with loads of questions that were tough to answer. I don't have concerns. I know he's looking forward to this week in Washington. It's going to be a busy one. But he insisted that the United States host this 75th anniversary summit. That came from him directly, and I know he's really looking forward to jumping in.
Julianne Smith, U.S. Ambassador to NATO at the Foreign Policy magazine NATO Summit preview today in Washington. Story about the NATO summit from Reuters. NATO will need between 35 and 50 extra brigades to fully realize its plans to defend against an attack from Russia, a military source told Reuters. The source, speaking on condition of anonymity, declined to provide any more detail about the plans, which are secret. A brigade consists of between 3,000 and 7,000 troops, so generating 35 to 50 more units would present a significant challenge. That story from Reuters. From Associated Press, President Joe Biden, in a letter to congressional Democrats, stood firm against calls for him to drop his candidacy and call for an end to the intra-party drama that has torn apart Democrats since his dismal public debate performance. Biden's efforts to shore up deeply anxious Democratic Party came Monday as lawmakers returned to Washington, confronting a choice: decide whether to work to revive his campaign or to try to edge out the party leader, a make-or-break time for his reelection and their own political futures. Biden wrote in a 2-page letter that the question of how to move forward has been well aired for over a week now, and it's time for it to end. He stressed that the party has one job, which is to defeat presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump in November. We have 42 days to the Democratic Convention and 119 days to the general election, Biden said in the letter. Any weakening of resolve or lack of clarity about the task ahead only helps Trump and hurts us. It's time to come together, move forward as a unified party, and defeat Donald Trump. That article from Associated Press. President Biden this morning called into the MSNBC program Morning Joe, where he again said he's staying in the race for president this year.
So you have repeatedly said that all of these people and entities are wrong. And let me go through them. The New York Times editorial board, The Economist, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Boston Globe, Jerry Nadler, Seth Moulton. Let me go to Julian Castro, Tim Ryan, David Axelrod, David Remnick, Richard Haas. Yeah, I know which one you're responding to there. Zeke Emanuel. But they're saying that you should step aside. So what is your plan of attack moving forward? These are pretty big names.
To go out and keep doing their big names. But I don't care what those big names think. They were wrong in 2020. They're wrong in 2022 about the red wave. They're wrong in 2024. And come out with me. Watch people react. You make a judgment. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I'm going to have all these foreign leaders here. I've been in contact with the new British Prime Minister. Anyway, look, the country, the rest of the world is looking. Our allies are looking for U.S. leadership. Who else do you think could step in here and do this? I expanded NATO. I solidified NATO. Ask your brother about it in Poland. I made sure that we're in a position where we have a coalition of people, of the nations around the world to deal with China, with Russia, with everything that's going on in the world. We're making real progress. The Biden plan, which got in Israel for the Gaza Strip, is something that was adopted by the UN Security Council. Whether it comes to fruition, it's awful close. We'll see. G7's okay. But look, I'm not going to explain any more about what I should or shouldn't do. I am running.
President Biden calling into the morning show on MSNBC, Morning Joe. During the answer to another question, he said he was frustrated by what he called the elites of his party.
The American public is not going to move away from me as an average voter. And again, I'm here for two reasons, pal. One, to rebuild the economy for hardworking middle-class people, give everybody a shot, just a straight shot. Everybody gets a fair chance, number one. Number two, remember all this talk about how I don't have the black support? Come on, give me a break. Come with me. Watch. I'm getting so frustrated by the elites. Now, I'm not talking about you guys, but about the elites in the party who they know so much more. But if any of these guys don't think I should run against me, go ahead, announce for president. Challenge me at the convention.
President Joe Biden on MSNBC this morning. Story from Politico. Congressman Adam Smith, ranking member on the Armed Services Committee, publicly said Monday that President Joe Biden should abandon his reelection bid, one day after he made that position clear during a private call with top House Democrats. Smith said in a statement, "The president's performance in the debate was alarming to watch, and the American people have made it clear they no longer see him as a credible candidate to serve 4 more years as president. Since the debate, the president has not seriously addressed those concerns." That was reporting from Politico, and that makes Congressman Adam Smith the 6th House Democrat to call for the president to step aside from the race. There are 213 House Democrats. First Lady Jill Biden voiced support for the president's reelection campaign during a rally today in Wilmington, North Carolina, as she launched the group Veterans and Military Families for Biden-Harris.
As Commander-in-Chief, President Biden wakes up every morning ready to work for you. That's what this election is all about, you. For all the talk out there about this race, Joe has made it clear that he's all in. Thank you. That's the decision that he's made. And just as he has always supported my career, I am all in too. I know you are too, or you wouldn't be here today. And with 4 more years, Joe will continue to fight for you, the military community that we are humbled and proud to call our own.
First Lady Jill Biden in Wilmington, North Carolina. White House says it was part of the launch of Veterans and Military Families for Biden-Harris, a national organizing program that will engage and mobilize millions of veterans and military families across the country to re-elect President Biden and Vice President Harris. And that events today will be in 3 key battleground states with high populations of veterans and military families, North Carolina, Florida, and Georgia. And the campaign will host additional events across several key battleground states in the future, including Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. Congressman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, chair of the Oversight and Accountability Committee, wrote a letter to the White House physician, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, on Sunday, demanding that he sit for an interview with the committee. The letter reads in part, after a concerning debate performance by President Biden against former President Donald Trump. On June 27th, journalists have rushed to report on what Americans have seen plainly for years. The president appears unwell. Americans question President Biden's ability to lead the country, and the Committee on Oversight and Accountability is investigating circumstances surrounding your assessment in February of this year that President Biden is a healthy, active, robust 81-year-old male who remains fit to successfully execute the duties of the presidency. Recently, it was reported that you have never recommended that President Biden take a cognitive test. The Oversight Committee is concerned your medical assessments have been influenced by your private business endeavors with the Biden family. Part of the letter from Congressman James Comer, and that letter was discussed today on the House floor by Congressman John Rose, Republican from Tennessee.
Mr. Speaker, the American people deserve to know whether or not the President of the United States is fully capable of performing his duties. After his cringeworthy debate performance, numerous public appearances, and even small private gatherings, many have concluded that he is not. However, the President's doctor stated in a routine physical assessment almost 5 months ago in February that President Biden, quote, fully executes all of his responsibilities without any exemptions or accommodations, close quote. Mr. Speaker, how can someone who needs pictures of what a podium and a stage are fully execute all of his responsibilities without any exemptions or accommodation? That's the question House Republicans are asking by calling on the President's doctor to participate in a transcribed interview before the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability. Additionally, House Republicans are determined to receive the audio tapes from the President's interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur. Yes, this is the same interview where Special Counsel Hur decided not to charge the President for his mishandling of classified documents because they were worried the President would, quote, present himself to a jury, as he did during our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory, close quote. Make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, our country is in serious danger. Our enemies are watching the President let in millions of illegal immigrants at our southern border. They're watching as he fumbles his way through interviews where the questions are written by his staff beforehand. This is a constitutional crisis. Each administration official, campaign staffer, congressional Democrat, or members of the press who have shielded the President's condition from the American public is complicit in a cover-up that is causing our country great pain. Enough is enough. Mr. Speaker, it's time to restore accountability and respectability for this White House and the American people. It's the least the Tennesseans I serve back home deserve. A President of the United States capable of doing the job.
Congressman John Rose, Republican from Tennessee, today on the House floor. Story from the New York Times: an expert on Parkinson's disease from Walter Reed National Military Medical Center visited the White House 8 times in 8 months, from last summer through this spring, including at least once for a meeting with President Biden's physician, according to official visitor logs. The expert, Dr. Kevin Kennard, is a neurologist who specializes in movement disorders and recently published a paper on Parkinson's. It was unclear whether Dr. Kennard was at the White House to consult specifically about the president or there for unrelated meetings. That was from the New York Times. This was a prominent topic at today's White House briefing with the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre.
There's been a lot of reporting in the last 24 hours about a Parkinson's expert who's come to visit the White House almost a dozen times over the last year or so, including at least one meeting with the president's physician. Could you state, very clearly, yes or no, was that expert here to participate in anything surrounding the care of the President of the United States?
So let me just say a couple of things. We have had a comprehensive, and I just want to take another step back, comprehensive physical examination. The president has had that. We've given a comprehensive report. We've shared that the past 3 years. Every year that he has had this exam, he sees a neurologist. And just to give you a quote from that, from the report most recently in February, an extremely detailed neurological exam was again reassuring in that there were no findings which would be consistent with any cerebellar or other central neurological disorder, such as a stroke, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, or ascending lateral sclerosis, end quote. So that came directly from in February in that comprehensive report that was provided by the president's doctor to me, that I share with all of you. So anyone who is watching can certainly go to our website.
The question, which was this expert's visits, was multiple visits to the White House pertaining at all to the president's care?
Well, here's the thing. I've said he has had three. He has had three physicals. In those 3 physicals, that's when he has seen a specialist, a neurological specialist. I have to be super mindful here, and this is why, and I'll explain this to you in a second. There are thousands of military personnel who come onto this White House. Many of them get the care from the White House medical unit, and so need to be super careful. There are, the medical unit hosts a wide range of specialists, from dermatologists to a neurologist, and so I cannot speak to every person because there's actually a security reasons to protect their privacy. We respect and protecting people's privacy, so do not want to share. I'm not going to share people's names from here, but the president, I can tell you, has seen a neurologist 3 times, as it's connected to a physical that he gets every year that we provide to all of you.
That's a very basic, direct question.
Wait. Hold on. Wait a second.
8 times, or at least once, in regards to the president specifically.
Hold on a second.
That's what you should be able to answer by this point.
Wait, no. No, wait a minute. Ed, please. A little respect here, please. So every year, around the president's physical examination, he sees a neurologist. That's 3 times, right? So I am telling you that he has seen a neurologist 3 times while he has been in this presidency. That's what I'm saying. I am telling you that he has seen them 3 times. That is what I'm sharing with you, right? So every time he has a physical, he has had to see a neurologist. So that is answering that question.
No, it's not.
No, it is. It is. You're asking me.
Kennard, come to the White House.
But I also said to you,
conditions.
Ed, I also said to you, for security reasons, we cannot share names. We cannot share names.
You cannot others he would have met with.
We
but
cannot,
you can share names in regards to if someone came here in regards to the president.
We cannot share names of specialists broadly, from a dermatologist to a neurologist. We cannot share names. There are security reasons. We have to protect. I understand that.
I hear you. Right there for anyone to see.
Ed, I hear you. I cannot from here confirm any of that because we have to keep their privacy. I think they would appreciate that too. We have to give them.
The doctor.
We have to keep their privacy.
It is public information.
I hear you.
And you're going to allow this to fester longer, Karine, unless the White House answers the question.
Hold on a second. There's no reason to go back and forth with me in this aggressive way.
Miffed around here about how information's been shared with the press corps about him.
What are you missed about? What are you missed about?
Everything he just asked about.
And then every time I come back and I answer the question that you guys asked.
Correctly, you didn't have to come back and clean it up.
I never answered the question incorrectly. That is not true. I was asked about a medical exam. I was asked about a physical. That was in the line of question that I answered. And I said, no, he did not have a medical exam. And I still stand by that. Matter of fact, the president still stands by that. He had a verbal check-in. That is something that the president has a couple times a week.
Now in regards to Dr. Kevin Kennard.
And I am telling you right now that I am not confirming names from here. It is the security reasons. I am not going to do that, Ed. It doesn't matter how hard you push me. It doesn't matter how angry you get with me. I'm not going to confirm a name. It doesn't matter if it's even in the log. I am not going to do that from here.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at the White House news conference today. Among the reporters asking her the questions, Ed O'Keefe, correspondent for CBS News. Story from Politico out of Milwaukee. The Republican Party is abandoning its position explicitly advocating for federal abortion limits in favor of former President Donald Trump's leave it to the states approach, under language adopted at a party platform committee meeting Monday. The platform, which will be finalized by a vote of the full convention body next week, represents a major change for the GOP and one that anti-abortion advocates had spent months rallying against. The new language describing abortion as an issue to be decided by the states is in line with the position held by Trump. Still, anti-abortion leaders are lauding the inclusion of language pointing to 14th Amendment protections that conservatives have long argued protects life beginning at conception. The committee was largely deferential to the Trump campaign's recommendations, receiving and adopting the proposed platform by lunchtime on Monday by a vote of 84 to 18. That story from Politico. The Republican National Convention begins in 1 week. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hi, I'm Susan Swain. This summer, I'll be on the air from Milwaukee and Chicago for C-SPAN's live gavel-to-gavel convention coverage. It's been a mainstay of our network since 1984. What has changed in recent years is C-SPAN's funding, now challenged by the many homes who have opted to cut the cord. This summer, an anonymous donor is generously helping support C-SPAN with a matching gift campaign. Every dollar given will be matched up to $25,000. Please consider giving to support our no commentary convention coverage and all of C-SPAN's public affairs programming. To learn more or to make a donation, find us at cspan.org/donate. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's free, and wherever you find your podcasts. Associated Press reporting from Paris that President Emmanuel Macron refused the resignation of France's prime minister, asking him on Monday to remain temporarily as the head of the government after a chaotic election result left the government in limbo. Voters split the legislature on the left, center, and far right, leaving no faction even close to the majority needed to form a government. The results from Sunday's vote raised the risk of paralysis for the European Union's second largest economy. That was reporting from AP. The France 24 television station announced the results of the election Sunday night.
France has come together to produce a shock, ripping up the political script. The coalition on the new left, a Popular Front, has defied all expectation. They've won the most parliamentary seats. You can see there with that chart. They've stopped short of a majority, however. The surprise result putting Emmanuel Macron's centrist alliance in second, and the far right, who were projected to finish with the most seats after the first round, only look set now to end in third.
A Washington Post headline reads, "Divided France enters uncharted political territory after historic vote." And joining us now from Paris is Washington Post international correspondent Rick Nowak. Thanks so much for being with us. After this vote, what is the path forward to form a coalition French government?
Thanks for having me on. I think it's going to be very complicated for anyone to really form a majority and a government. No clear majority has emerged. the left might have the best chances to form a government eventually, but it still is around 100 seats away from an outright majority that it would need to survive no confidence votes in parliament. So this really is an unprecedented situation, and I think a lot of people are waiting for President Emmanuel Macron to say something and to indicate who he will appoint as the next prime minister. But even though President Macron is able to appoint that person, the next prime minister will still need to be able to survive no confidence votes. So that person will still need to have a majority in parliament eventually.
President Macron is in Washington this week for the NATO Summit. How does that complicate things?
Well, I think what he's trying to show is that he is still, that France is still run by a government, that he's in control, that this election is not going to complicate France's role in the world and France's role as an ally of the United States. I think that's quite important to him. But at the same time, obviously, very important decisions will have to be made at home in Paris this week. And so it's going to be interesting to see whether he really goes ahead, whether he delays, postpones, or heads back to Paris earlier than expected to be able to deal with this.
The first round of voting in France saw the far right doing better than expected, but that didn't last. Is there any indication why?
Yeah, it's very interesting. The far right did very well because it has been able to really transform itself in many ways from a French group in France to something that is more of a mainstream political force. But what happened between the first and the second round is that the centrists, so Macron's allies, essentially coordinated with the left and withdrew certain candidates from certain races where the presence of a third candidate could have enabled a far-right victory. So essentially, they played political games to prevent far-right victories in over 200 constituencies out of these 577 seats in the lower house of parliament. So that explains why the far right did much worse than people had anticipated. But still, it came as a total surprise to many, including members of the left, members of Macron's team. This really was not expected.
We're talking with Washington Post reporter Rick Nowak in Paris. We've been talking about parties far left, far right. In terms of policy, what changes can be expected from this vote? Well,
for a start, it's going to complicate budget negotiations. It's going to complicate Parliament's ability to pass any bills. A lot of Macron's proposed bills are essentially no longer moving forward. It's unclear if they ever will. So Macron's agenda really has been hit and impacted hard by this vote. If the left comes to power, if the left is able to form some kind of government, it may want to push through some of its proposals, such as undoing what Macron did last year, which was raising the retirement age, a very unpopular bill that he passed there. So they could start with that. I think there would be probably a majority to be found to reverse some of what Macron has been doing over the past 7 years.
And finally, what does this all mean for U.S. relations with France?
Well, I think it means that France will become less predictable. French politics really has not. This is unprecedented for France, or at least in recent history in France. A lot of analysts I've been speaking to, they acknowledge that they don't really know what's happening next. This country was not built, or the country's political system was not built to center around consensus building. Consensus building is something that's more common in German politics, for example, in Europe, but it's not really the DNA of French politics. And it's going to be very complicated, I think, for the next parliament, the next French parliament, to really pass any bills and come to any meaningful decisions.
Washington Post international correspondent Rick Nowak joining us from Paris. You can find his articles at WashingtonPost.com and on X at Rick_N. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
From the New York Times, an election upset in Iran. The reformist candidate who advocated moderate policies at home and improved relations with the West won the presidential runoff against a hardline rival, according to results released by the Interior Ministry on Saturday. The winner, a 69-year-old cardiac surgeon, got 16.3 million votes to defeat the hardliner with 13.5 million votes. It was a blow to the conservative faction, Iran's ruling establishment, and a major victory for the relatively moderate reformist camp, which has been sidelined from politics for the past few years. The article from the New York Times. Question about this to the U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at today's briefing.
The new President-elect of Iran, Pezeshkian, he said in some of his first remarks that he wants to, the tone is very different from his predecessor, saying he wants to reach out to the U.S. or to the West and have a better relationship. How does the U.S. see that? This administration obviously at the beginning wanted to restore the JCPOA. Could there be a return to that?
So we have no expectations that this election will lead to a fundamental change in Iran's direction or its policies. At the end of the day, it's not the president that has the ultimate say over the future of Iran's policy. It is the supreme leader. And of course, we have seen the direction that he has chosen to take Iran in. Obviously, if the new president had the authority to make steps to curtail Iran's nuclear program, to stop funding terrorism, to stop destabilizing activities in the region, those would be steps that we would welcome. But needless to say, we don't have any expectation that that's what's likely to ensue.
Okay, no expectations. Does that mean you're willing to try him out? See if would you be open to testing the waters with the new president?
So let's let him take office first. I don't have anything to announce today. We have always said that diplomacy is the most effective way to achieve an effective, sustainable solution with regard to Iran's nuclear program. One of the issues with which we have great concerns, obviously, and nothing about the election has changed that. But we have also made clear that we are far from any kind of meaningful diplomatic resolution right now, given Iran's escalation across the board.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his news conference in Washington. Story from Reuters. Recent satellite imagery shows major expansions at two key Iranian ballistic missile facilities that two American researchers assessed are for boosting missile production, a conclusion confirmed by three senior Iranian officials. That from Reuters. Wall Street today, the Dow down 31, NASDAQ up 50, S&P up 5. At TSA on X, the Transportation Security Administration, posting breaking news. TSA officers have set a new record for most travelers screened in a single day on Sunday, July 7th. 3,013,413 people were screened at checkpoints nationwide, surpassing the previous record set on June 23rd, 2024. From ABC News, the Boeing company has agreed in principle to a deal with the Department of Justice that will include a guilty plea to conspiracy to defraud the U.S. related to the company allegedly misleading the Federal Aviation Administration during the evaluation of the 737 MAX, according to a court filing from the DOJ. In addition to the guilty plea, the agreement includes Boeing paying the maximum statutory fine and investing at least $455 million in its compliance and safety programs. The deal is not yet final, and families of the victims of the MAX crashes in 2018 and 19 have expressed their intention to oppose the plea agreement. That was from ABC News. Turning to Hurricane Beryl, this from NBC. National Hurricane Center said it made landfall near the coastal town of Matagorda, Texas, about 85 miles southwest of Houston, packing maximum sustained winds of 80 miles per hour. Life-threatening storm surge, damaging wind gusts, and flooding rainfall, according to the center, continued to batter southeastern Texas. 2 people died after trees fell on their homes in Harris County, Texas. The storm has now claimed the lives of at least 13 people in the past week. More than 2.5 million customers are without power. Some of the reporting from NBC News. Texas Governor Greg Abbott was interviewed this morning on CNBC from South Korea. He's there on a trade mission that also has stops in Taiwan and Japan. And they talked about that, but the first minute of the interview was about the storm back home.
Texas has probably the top division of emergency management in the country. And I just got off the phone with the chief of that division, and they had prepared days in advance with supplies, with support, with response in a massive triangle, looking where you are on the map there, where the Hurricane I came across, stretching all the way almost over to Louisiana, then stretching up where the map just showed right there, just on the Texas side of Shreveport. Listen, there's going to continue to be a massive rain event all the way from the Gulf Coast up to northeast Texas. So we're concerned about a rain and heavy rain challenge that we're going to see in the state of Texas, as well as the winds that continue to whip through the greater Houston area and will continue a high wind event all the way up through central East Texas.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican, in a CNBC interview while the governor is on a trade mission in Asia. While he's there, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, also Republican, has been acting governor. He was interviewed by the Weather Channel this morning about Hurricane Beryl.
We were concerned earlier in the week, you remember when it was forecast maybe to Mexico and down in the Rio Grande Valley, that it would keep moving this direction to our large population centers. Of course, we don't want the storm to hit anywhere, but it did indeed in Matagorda County. And really, Houston is getting the brunt of the wind and the rain, and will have potential flooding, some street flooding now in certain areas down in Galveston, for example. But the rivers upstream concern us, because as this storm moves out of Houston late today, early this evening, it goes up into the Lufkin area, Tyler, Texarkana, Longview, and those folks can expect, if they live up there, beware, 6 to 12 inches of rain. And you already have saturated grounds. And of course, when all that rain falls on northeast Texas, it has to come down. So Houston will see the rain and the wind for the most part go out late today and early this evening. But we're going to have some more rain bands tomorrow that will come through, some scattered heavy rain. But we're going to see that water coming down through the rivers, and that will have to go out to the Gulf of Mexico at some point. So this is not like a one-day event. And in northeast Texas, people have to be aware. They're not going to have the heavy winds that we've had in the Houston area, but they will have a lot of rain.
Texas Lieutenant Governor and acting governor now, Dan Patrick, in a Weather Channel interview, acting governor while the governor is out of the country. Washington Post article noting that Hurricane Beryl traveled 13 days and more than 5,000 miles after its initial formation, making 3 landfalls. Also, Beryl is the earliest Category 5 on record in the Atlantic Ocean, the earliest U.S. hurricane landfall since Arthur in 2014, and the strongest storm to form in June, beating Audrey from 1957. White House also says that President Biden has been receiving regular updates about Hurricane Beryl after it made landfall in South Texas on Monday morning. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, word for word. You'll get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. You can sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.